start to the Dharma talk, please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Good afternoon. Dear beloved teacher and to our Sangha. Today we will continue our discussion on the Four Noble Truths. Today we will be discussing the third Noble Truth, which is the cessation to suffering. As we've discussed previously in the first couple of sessions, that the first Noble Truth is in life there is suffering, right? So we discussed the various aspects of what suffering is, what suffering means, what is considered to be suffering. And then the last one we discussed the second Noble Truth, which was the cause of suffering, which we discussed to be the desire or the attachment to desires. And so today, for the third Noble Truth, we discuss the cessation of suffering, right? Since we spoke about what is suffering, what causes suffering, now we get to speak about how we can end that suffering, or at least the path to get to that point, right? So, as we hopefully should know, that the aim in Buddhist practice is to develop this reflective mind, this mind of awareness, of mindfulness, to be able to let go of those sufferings that we have, to let go of the delusions, the ignorance, the greed and anger that we hold. And so by being able to sit and contemplate and investigate those aspects of our life that causes suffering or dissatisfaction or distress, then we're able to let them go, right? As we contemplate, as we observe and reflect on our suffering, we can start then asking ourselves, why, right? If you've been to my meditation class, you know that I'm always telling you to ask yourself why. Why is this like this? Why is this happening? Where is this coming from, right? The whole point of investigation, the whole point of contemplation in our practice is to figure out the root causes of our suffering, of what's going on in our mind, right? Buddhism is a mind-centered thing that happens. Everything that we react to, everything that we think and do is from our own mind, right? And so as we start to reflect on the suffering and recognize and see the nature of this desire, then we're able to recognize the attachment to desire and to that and how it causes us suffering. And as we mentioned in the last session of desire and the attachment that we have to desires, we're able to see that some of these desires are so rooted in our mind that it's going to be difficult to kind of pinpoint them exactly and be able to get rid of them, essentially, right? But we've discussed that anything that's external, any external circumstances that we believe causes happiness also eventually cause us to suffer, right? Because happiness and suffering are both impermanent. And the sooner we're able to recognize that and realize that, the sooner we're able to let those desires and those attachments to those desires go, right? And so as we start to recognize that, then we're able to see that we can't so much control those external circumstances to a point, right? There are certain things we can control externally, like our jobs, our relationships, right? Our so as we start to practice and learn and develop our practice, we're able to see that, yes, I'm suffering, not because that person is yelling at me and calling me names, but because I'm allowing that name calling to affect me, right? Someone's going to call me a fat purple cow. Fat purple cow. But now those penetrate you, and then you're suffering because of those words. Those words have no real meaning, have no real action necessarily, right? It's part of that ego that we are holding on to, saying, no, I'm not a fat purple cow. How dare you call me a fat purple cow? So it's our ego defending itself, which is part of our practice, is to recognize what is ego and what is truth, what is false and what is truth, right? So not to say that we shouldn't have, I know last time we talked about desire and what in Buddhism, but we also discussed that not all desire is bad necessarily, right? And not having and thinking to not have any desires at all. The other pendulum, right? So it's not about not caring at all from a place of apathy and nihilism, but be able to a place of compassion and acceptance, right? And so as we start learning that we can't just hold our anger in, right? Because depending if you're the type of person that holds grudges, right? The longer you hold onto that grudge, the angrier you become, right? The more you're just waiting for that good moment to lash out finally, right? Because you're just holding on, you're waiting for that perfect moment to just let it all out. But then what happens typically after that, after you've let it all out? Usually people start regretting it, right? You regret your actions. You start regretting what you said. And so not only now did you cause suffering for another person because you're lashing out or lashed out, but now you're suffering too because now you're regretting what you did. You're regretting what you said, right? And so the part of our practice of mindfulness and being able to recognize things, right? Because each of the Four Noble Truths aspects, recognition, encouragement, and realization, right? We have to recognize that there is suffering here. We have to recognize that there is a cause for suffering. We recognize that there's a way to release that suffering and recognize that there's a path to escape that suffering. And same thing with encouragement. We encourage that, yes, there is suffering there. Because we don't want to deny suffering because it's there. Kind of go down through the list through all the Four Noble Truths. But the point is not to deny suffering, not to say that it doesn't exist or I'll worry about it later, right? Because that's what we typically do. When we're in a situation of something that we don't want to do right now, right? Whether it's a chore or it's a job or something, we push off to later, right? We're like, oh, I'll do that tomorrow, I'll do that later, I'll do that, blah, 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 right? Same thing happens mentally with suffering is if you're in a difficult situation, we either don't want to sit and listen and help, right? If you don't want to sit and listen and help and recognize someone else's suffering, then you just start denying. You're like, no, I don't want to listen to this. Oh my God, you're so annoying. Why are you venting? I don't want to hear your vents, right? But if we're able to accept it, then there's two good ways to be able to accept that reality. The first one is to be able to stop arguing with it, to stop arguing with the reality, right? Because what happens sometimes is whenever we think, oh, I can't believe she did that, or I can't believe he said that, or I can't believe this is how things are, blah, 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 right? So if you start thinking like that, then, and wanting things and people to be different, or have a negative reaction to anything that has already happened, then that's arguing with reality, right? We're not accepting what's happening. We're not able to say, yes, you know what? that did hurt my feelings. Or, this did happen this way, even though it didn't go the way I want it to go, right? Which happens a lot in life, because life is not picture perfect, right? You want a good job, or you want a promotion, you didn't get it. Now you're like, oh, my job doesn't care about me. My work is whatever, right? So you start making excuses for things like that. But that's what causes us to suffer. And then if we're able to stop and actually, instead of fighting with denial, and be able to approach things with compassion and understanding, that means we're able to recognize the suffering that is in other people, right? I always use the example of road rage. I guess road rage. But if someone's cutting you off in the middle of traffic, right? That's a good opportunity to bring your practice into action, right? Because we can wish and hope that something happens to them or doesn't happen to them, whatever it may be, but the way we process what's happening, the way we think about that person cutting us off or what we want to do in retaliation is what's going to start becoming like a concrete characteristic, right? If you constantly think negatively about people cutting you off or what you want to do to them because they cut you off, the more you do that, the more you tell yourself those things, the more it's going to start being embedded into your characteristic, right? Then you start becoming that type of person. So that every situation, negative or positive, you're only going to think that way. You can't see the two sides of the story. You can't recognize that that other person is also suffering, right? Because we're mostly selfish beings. We're mostly selfish beings. So we don't want to care about what the other person's going through or how they're thinking. We just care that we too cut them off because they cut us off, right? We're like, I don't care if someone's having a baby in the child backseat, I don't care. I'm still going to cut you off regardless, right? They're rushing to the hospital, they're rushing somewhere, but we don't care about that. We just care about revenging our ego. And so the more we're able to recognize that type of thought process, the easier it is to catch ourselves from thinking negatively, from saying things negatively, and from doing things negatively, right? Because everything starts as a thought, right? Someone yells at you. The first thing first thing that's going to happen is, how dare they yell at me? I'm going to yell back, right? And then you start yelling back. And if yelling doesn't work, then you're going to start attacking them, physically attacking them, right? So it goes from one point to another. So you have different stages you're able to catch yourself from doing something worse, right? So if the first thought, if at first you're thinking negatively or thinking of what you want to do in retaliation, if you're able to stop yourself from at that point, then you don't have to worry about saying anything bad. But let's say you can't catch yourself and then you say something bad. Now you have another opportunity to catch yourself from doing something bad, right? And if you don't do anything, and if you don't catch yourself from doing something bad, now it's already happened. You've created this karma. You've created a cause, and later on you're going to get the effect. What is the effect? Your own mental suffering. Now you're regretting it. Now you're thinking back of how you should have or could have said something different or did something differently, right? So now we're drowning in past mistakes. We're drowning in this mental movie of ours of how we could have did something different, did or said something differently, right? Because we do that pretty often. We do that all the time. We always think of, oh, I could have said that differently, or I could have done this differently. Or you think of the perfect comeback like a week later, right? So we're constantly thinking about past events. But in the same hand, we're also thinking of the future. We're always anxious of what to do next, right? We're already thinking of the comeback, right? If someone's yelling at us or arguing with us, we're already thinking of what we want to say. Instead of just sitting, listening, actively listening, opening up our minds with compassion and with openness and acceptance. If we're able to do that, then we're able to not just help ourselves, but help the other people. Because when someone's yelling at us, we can't usually recognize that they are suffering. That's why they're yelling. If they weren't suffering, then they wouldn't be yelling at us, right? If they weren't suffering, they wouldn't be doing the negative things or the things that are causing you to suffer as well. If someone is arguing with us or yelling at us, and the sooner we're able to see that they are also suffering, then we're able to open up our minds and our hearts and be compassionate and be understanding and know that I am on a journey myself to escape suffering. They also want to be on a journey to escape suffering. So let me help them by helping myself. And the way to help yourself is to wear that Buddhist hat and say, what would Buddha do? Right? WWBD, right? Instead of WWJD. So once we're able to stop arguing with reality, then we're able to actually see it for what it is. And this is something I bring up quite often, is as things happen in life, or as we see things happening, what do we typically do? We make up a story, right? We don't see things for what it really is. A door opens, and we're like, who is this person? Do they belong here? Are they just visiting? Are they random? Are they strangers? How dare they come 20 minutes after a session started? How dare they ruin my meditation? How dare they ruin Dharma talk, right? We're already creating something from just hearing. And it's not real reality, right? We're already making that up. If the were to fall over, every single one of us is going to have a different idea of how and why it fell over. Maybe some of those ideas may mesh together and make sense, but we're all going to have different perceptions, right? And so there's a lot of different perceptions, and we think that our perceptions are reality. So if there's so many perceptions and then there's so many realities, then which one's right? Who's right? Who's wrong? What makes it right? What makes it wrong? Right? So if we're able to see things for what they really are, then it's easier just to let go of the negative parts of life and the negative things that we see and do, right? If your significant other were to forget your anniversary, now you're like, oh, they obviously don't love me. They're not committed to this relationship, right? Or your boss is late to a meeting with you. You're like, oh, they don't appreciate my time. How dare they, right? This is just another form of attachment because we're wanting things to be different than what they are. Sorry, I'm already daydreaming about different stories. Anyway. But on the other hand, if your boss applauds you and says, oh, you did a great job, and you're like, oh, wait, am I going to get a promotion? Right? Or your kid shows some interest in sciences, and you're already daydreaming, ooh, they're going to go to medical school, right? But then when reality catches up with you and that doesn't happen, now you're like, oh, man. You're all butthurt because you're like, that's not what I wanted, right, to happen. So now you're back to arguing with reality instead of accepting it for what it is. So when we're able to practice compassion, practice understanding, right, to help us recognize that other perspectives do exist there, right? That way we're able to loosen our grip on how we see the world, right? So instead of making up stories for what's happening or to fight with your ego or fight with yourself, then we're just able to accept things, open up ourselves. And so instead of judging, we're able to just bear witness to it, right? Instead of just analyzing the situation and judging it, right? So when we're able to, if you're in a situation, we're able to just sit and see that, oh, there's a car accident. Just an accident. It's an accident between two people. Versus saying, oh, was it a woman? I bet it's a woman. or maybe it's an old person. It's probably an old person they should be driving, right? So you see why the car accident happened in the first place. This is just witness accident has happened. Because if you do create that story of, oh, I bet it's a woman or a person, or I bet it's some ethnic group that we all have ideas. If we do that often, then every time we see that situation or see those types of people, we're automatically judging them based on our false perceptions, right? Because as we know, like anything we do in life, the more you practice something, the more you become better at it, right? And our mind's the same. The more we tell ourselves something that's true or false, the more we ingrain when a certain situation arises, right? Because humans are very reactive beings, right? We react almost automatically. If someone yells at us, we're automatically yelling back. If someone attempts to attempting to hunt them back, right? We don't sit and see and listen and watch of what's happening. We just react. And if by reacting, we're not creating truth. We're just adding to the falsehood that's happening. We're adding to the negative action that's already happening, that's being created by others. So when we're able to or just stay, and be mindful of the situation, be mindful of what's going on, it's easier to see things from different angles, from different perspectives. We're able to recognize that this person's doing this or saying that because they are also suffering the way that I'm suffering. Then hopefully you come to a realization that you want to help them too, right? Because from the Buddhist perspective, when we start to learn and practice Buddhism, we do it for ourselves, right? Because we're all here for one reason or another, but the one reason we all share, regardless, is that we all suffer, right? That's the one commonality we all have. Maybe you have different ideas or different objectives of why you come to temple or why you practice and study Buddhism or meditation. But through all those different reasonings, the one reason we all have in common is that we all suffer. And that we want to get rid of that suffering, to stop that suffering, right? So as we are able to practice and recognize and encourage and be open and accepting of suffering, the easier it will be for us to allow it, to listen to it, right? To see and accept suffering from a point of compassion and understanding. Because not all suffering is going to be easy, obviously, right? There's some pretty hefty sufferings that we have out there, but any and all suffering still has the possibility of being touched by our love, by our compassion, by our understanding. Some sufferings may take longer than others to get rid of, or to subdue, or to understand, right? Don't think of suffering of just physical suffering, right? Someone hit me, oh, it hurt, right? Or a car accident, right? It's also physiological suffering, psychological suffering, mental, emotional, right? And those are usually the more difficult ones to subdue, because when we are physically hurt, for example, we can take medication to subdue that pain for the time being, right? We can distract ourselves with work or with chores or whatever it is. But when we are mentally suffering, then it's that voice in our head that's constantly going on, right? It's constantly speaking to us. It's constantly telling us how to think, how to do, what to say, right? So that's the big suffering that most people are trying to get rid of, is that mental talk, right? That's where practice and meditation comes in handy. Never mind, I was going to tell a story, but it's a long story. But if you're at least able to, you don't have to, I always say, you don't have to sit down for an hour of meditation, right? Meditation is very important. It can do wonderful things to you. It may take a lot of time to see any results or fruits from that meditation, but I guarantee you others will see those changes before you ever will. Because those changes may be very subtle, but those are changes regardless, right? A lot of time, and I hear people say this all the time when they come to meditation class, or they just come and they're saying, oh, I don't know if I'm meditating correctly. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if anything's actually happening, right? Of course, I can't answer those questions for you. If you give me your mind, I can tell you. Can you give me your mind? You can't give me your mind. That's also a Zen story. There's a famous Zen monk who, I think he traveled to China, and he was discussing Dharma with another senior monk of whatever temple he visited. And I guess they were having some sort of discussion. I can't remember exactly the story. They were having a discussion or a debate, and the senior monk of that temple lost the debate, right? And so after the Zen monk left, a senior monk followed him, and he asked them, he begged them to take him as a student, to teach him, to show him enlightenment. So he would follow this Zen monk through the forest, through the caves, and all this stuff. He was following. And eventually the senior monk asked him, teacher, after all this time, I haven't attained enlightenment. Show me enlightenment. And the Zen monk asked him, give me your mind, and I'll give you enlightenment. And at that moment, he woke up and was like, oh, I get it now. Right? So you may not be able to see the things that happen in your mind or through your practice of meditation. But the more you practice, the more, and even the subtle change in your mind is going to be very important. It's going to be very helpful. It's going to be very enlightening, right? Sometimes we have bursts of enlightenment moments, right? Don't think of nirvana or enlightenment as this heavenly place we go to after we die. No, it's not the case. Nirvana and enlightenment is here and now in our lifetime, in our world. It is just a mindset. What is nirvana? What is enlightenment? It is a mindset free from ideas, free from ignorance, free from greed, free from anger. That's enlightenment. So as we sit in meditation, a lot of people, especially during longer sits, or if you go to retreats, or you practice diligently and often, then you may have bursts of enlightenment moments, of aha moments, right? It may not last more than a few seconds, but it's still happening. And it's still very, very helpful. And so don't be discouraged if you're thinking to yourself, oh, nothing's happening to me. I'm meditating all this time and there's no change. There is a change. I promise you there's a change. But you do have to put in the work, right? Buddhism, enlightenment, free from suffering, aren't ideas. You can't just wish to not suffer. You can't just wish for enlightenment. You have to put in the work, obviously, right? Like I said yesterday during meditation class, if we were to remove all these statues from here, this would still be a temple. The statue doesn't make the temple. The statue are here as guides. So when you look at the Buddha, you want to see the characteristics of what a Buddha is. What is a Buddha? A Buddha is an enlightened person. A Buddha is free from the three poisons of ignorance, greed, and anger. They are full of compassion, and generosity, and humility. And so when we see the images of the Buddha, when we are chanting and when we bow, we are trying to develop those characteristics of the Buddha within ourselves, right? Each of the saints in the corners of the bodhisattvas, they all carry specific characteristics. And so when we pray or invoke their names, we are trying to develop those characteristics within ourselves, to develop compassion, to develop generosity, to develop the desire to help all sentient beings. Right? Those are tools. These statues are tools. Just like the Dharma are tools. The Four Noble Truths are tools. These are tools to create your mind temple for you to go inside and meditate and become a Buddha too. Right? So we can put an end to our suffering just by realizing that our suffering is not worth suffering for. Right? Is your suffering worth it? Do you want to go through all that suffering you're going through? No. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? You're going to run away? Are you going to move? Are you going to pack up your bags and travel through Europe or Asia? Your suffering is still going to follow you. Your suffering is still there. Your suffering is not out there. Your suffering isn't your house, isn't your relationship, isn't your job. Your suffering is all in here, in your mind. It's how you perceive things. It's how you accept or not accept things that causes that suffering. So the more you're able to accept the things, understand where they're coming from, why they're coming from, why they're there, then it's easier for us to weed out what's causing it, right? I always tell people to practice the why meditation, like I mentioned earlier. Why am I suffering? Why are things like this? Why is this happening? Where is this coming from? Why? The more you ask yourself, the deeper you're able to dig through that suffering to find that core reason or reasons of why you are suffering, the easier it is to do something about it, right? Like I said, maybe it's a person. So if it is a person, maybe you have to unfriend them, distance yourself from them, release them from your life, right? But it's at least something that's concrete that you know what or who is causing that suffering. And now you have something to do about it. If you don't do anything about it, then you're just going to continue to suffer. Right? Okay. I'm going to stop there. Otherwise, I go through more, and you know how I like to talk. Anyway, any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts? I do encourage everyone to read on the Four Noble Truths. Buddhism doesn't have a Bible of any sort, but if there were one, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path would be it. And so we are more than halfway through the Four Noble Truths. We have the fourth one that I'll discuss next time. And then we're going to spend quite a few months on Eightfold Path, which is the tools to create your enlightenment. But you know what I mean. The tools to dig your path, dig your little enlightenment hole, nirvana den. Okay. Well, there's no questions. We'll go to transfer the mirror and go to chanting. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. For any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings and wish them full enlightenment.
We go to practice. Inviting the bell. Bodhi, speech and mind and perfect oneness, I send my heart all with the sound of love. May the hearers awaken from forgetfulness and all anxiety and sorrow. Listen, this wonderful brings me back to my true home. Incense offering. In gratitude we offer this incense to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas throughout space and time. May it be fresh as earth, reflecting our careful efforts, our wholehearted mindfulness, and the fruit of understanding slowly ripening. May we and all beings become happy Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. May we awaken from forgetfulness and realize our true home. Opening verse. The incense in the center now is burning. All the Dharma realm in every auspicious house appearing. Our sincere intention thus fulfilling, as all Buddhas show their perfect body. Homage to the incense cloud canopy, Bodhisattva and great Bodhisattva. Verses for bowing. We bow together. Homage to the eternally abiding Buddha, the supreme Dharma, and sagely Sangha throughout the Dharma realm and the realm of entity and 3 periods of time. Homage to the fundamental
Universal Great Conduct Bodhisattva, all Dharma guarding Deva Bodhisattva, and the glorious mountain assembly of Buddha Bodhisattva.
Om
To Amitabha Buddha in the land of ultimate bliss, Avalokiteshvara, great compassion Bodhisattva, great strength Bodhisattva, earth-born great Bodhisattva, and the
assembly
of great pure sea-like Bodhisattva.
Sit down. The Great Compassion Mantra. The Great Compassion Mantra. Namo
Great compassionate Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, Namo great compassionate Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, Namo great compassionate Buddhas and Bodhisattvas.
Namo Ratnajaya,
Namo Arya Avalokiteshvaraya, Bodhisattvaya, Mahasattvaya, Mahakarunikaya, Om Sarvaravaye, Sudanadasya, Namaskrit Mamarya Pararamdava Monara Kendi Hrimahava Swami Sarvarhato Shobham Ajiyam Sarva Sattva Namo Vastava Namo Vakamavitato Aryata Om Avaloke Lokate Karati Ihiri Mahabodhisattva Sarva Sarva Mara Mara Mahi Mahi Hridayam Koro Koro Doro Doro Vijati Mahavijate Dara Dara Dirini Shvaraya Chala Chala Vama Vimala Muktalehi Ehi Shina Shina Arsham Brashari Vishva Vishva Brashaya Holo Holo Mara Holo Holo Hri Sara Sara Siri Siri Soro Soro Bodhiya Bodhiya Bodhaya Bodhaya Maitreya Narayana Siddhayogi Shvaraya Swaha Narakindi Swaha Maranara Swaha Sira Simha Mokaya Swaha Sarva Maha Siddhaya Swaha Chakraha Siddhaya Swaha Padma Kasaya Swaha Narakindi Vagalaya Swaha Mahavadi Sankaraya Swaha Namo Ratna Trayaya Namo Arya Palokite Shavaraya Swaha Om Sidyanto Mantra Padaya Swaha.
The Dhamma
Body
Bodhi
is bringing morning light in concentration. My heart is at peace. A half smile is born on mine. This is a new day, and I vow to go through it in mindfulness. The sun of wisdom has risen, shining in every direction. Noble Sangha, diligently bring your mind into meditation. Namo Shakyamunaye Bodhaya. Namo Shakyamunaye Bodhaya. Namo Shakyamunaye Bodhaya.
Worship Opening Sutra. The
Surpass profound and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in hundreds of millions of eons. I now see and hear it, receive and uphold, and I vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.
touching the earth, the one who is
Bows and the one who is bowed to are both by nature empty. Therefore the communication between them is inexpressibly perfect. Our practice and is the net of Indra, reflecting all Buddhas everywhere, as my own person reflects in all Buddhas, to whom with my life I go for refuge.
offering
Bring light in the 10 directions, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to whom we bow in gratitude. The way of awareness in the very midst of suffering and confusion. Shakyamuni Buddha, the awakened one, to whom we bow in gratitude.
cutting through
Through ignorance, awakening our hearts and our minds. Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of great understanding, to whom we bow in gratitude.
working
Mindfully working joyfully for the sake of all beings. Samantabhadra, the Bodhisattva of great action, to whom we bow in gratitude.
responding
To
to
suffering, serving beings in countless ways. Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of great compassion, to
bowing gratitude.
Seed of awakening
And loving kindness in children, sprouts, and all beings, Maitreya, the Buddha, to be born, to whom we bow in gratitude.
showing
The way fearlessly and compassionately, the stream of all our ancestral teachers, to whom we bow in gratitude.
the Dhamma
Is deep and lovely. We now have a chance to see it and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning.
of the Pranaparamita, the Bodhisattva
Avalokita, while moving in the deep course of Prajnaparamita, shed light on the 5 skandhas and found them equally. After this penetration, he overcame ill-beingness and Shariputra. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is not other than empty, emptiness is not other than form. The same is true with feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Listen, Shariputra, all dharmas are marked with emptiness. They are neither produced nor destroyed, neither defiled nor immaculate, neither increasing nor decreased. Therefore in emptiness there is neither form nor feeling, nor perceptions, nor mental formations, nor consciousness, no eye or ear or nose or tongue or body, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no object of mind, no realms of elements, no interdependent origins, and no extinction of no ill-being, no cause of ill-being, no end of ill-being, and no path to understanding, no attainment, because there is the Bodhisattva's ground in Prajnaparamita, find no obstacles for their minds, having no obstacles they overcome fear, liberating themselves forever from illusion and realizing perfect nirvana. All Buddhas in the past, present, and future arrive at Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Therefore, that perfect understanding is the highest mantra, the unequal mantra, the destroyer of ill-being, the incorruptible truth. The mantra of Prajnaparamita should therefore be Gate Gate Para Gate Para Samgate Bodhi Swaha Gate Gate Para Gate Para Samgate Bodhi Swaha Gate Gate Para Gate Para Samgate Bodhi Swaha.
invoking the Bodhisattva's name. We invoke
Your name, Avalokiteshvara. We aspire to learn your way of listening in order to help relieve the suffering in the world. You know how to listen in order to understand. We invoke your name in order to practice listening with all our attention and open-heartedness. We will sit and listen without any prejudice. We will sit and listen with name Manjushri, we aspire to learn your way, which is to be still and to look deeply into the heart of things, and in the hearts of people we will look with all our attention and open-heartedness. We will look with unprejudiced eyes. We will, without judging or reacting, we will look deeply so that we will be able to see and understand the roots of suffering through the impermanent and selfless nature of all. We will practice your way of using the sword of understanding to cut through the bonds of suffering, thus freeing ourselves and other species.
We invoke
your name, Samanta Bhadra. We aspire to practice your vow to act with the eyes and heart of compassion, to bring joy to one person in the morning and to ease the pain of one person in the afternoon. We know that the happiness of others is our own happiness, and we ask to practice joy on the path of service. We know that every word, every look, every action, and every smile can bring happiness to all. We know that if we practice wholeheartedly, we ourselves may become an inexhaustible source of peace and joy for our loved and for all species.
We invoke your name,
Shiti Garbha. We aspire to learn your way of being present where there is darkness, suffering, oppression, and so we can bring light, hope, relief, and liberation to those places. We are determined not to forget or abandon those in desperate situations. We will do our best to establish contact with those who can way out of their suffering, those whose cries for help, justice, equality, and human rights are not being heard. We know that on earth we will do our best not to contribute to creating more health, to help transform the hells that already exist. We will practice in order to realize the qualities of perseverance and stability, so that like the earth we can always be supportive and faithful to those in need.
We bow together, the three refuges. I take refuge in the Buddha, the one who shows me the way in this life. I take refuge in the Dharma, the way of understanding and of love. I take refuge in the Sangha, the community that lives in harmony and awareness. Dwelling
in the refuge of Buddha, I clearly see the path keeping my practice free of obstruction.
Taking refuge
in the Buddha in myself, I aspire to help all people recognize their own awakened nature, realizing the mind of love, taking refuge in the Dharma. In myself, I aspire to help all people fully master the ways of practice and walk together on the path of liberation, taking refuge in the Sangha. In myself, I aspire to help all people build fourfold communities to embrace all beings and support their transformation.
sharing the merit, reciting
the Sutta. Without limits, we vow to share the fruits with all beings. We vow to offer tribute to parents, teachers, friends, and numerous beings, to give guidance and support all